Okay, so we know that the farms, they just interact in the marketplace, but they do have a lot of contractual relations. And those contractual relationships are often with respect to their different inputs. Now, what are those inputs? We know standard inputs are labor and also other factors of productions. And another factors of production is simply the capital. So that means there are financial contract with the financial market or the lenders of the farm. Okay, so there are contractual relationship exist between farms and their factors of productions. Okay, and so that is the beginning of this any kind of existence of farm, which will have a network of contracts with many other entities. Okay, so factors of productions are there. Similarly, they might have contract with the downstream retailers and all that. So that's how a farm is organized and undertake production activities. Okay, so now I'll move on to this story and let me just
give you a little bit of the sense. Think of example between a coal mine and a electricity generator. Okay, and you know that these are two different entities. One owner of a coal mine not necessarily is the owner of the electricity generating station, so the thermal power station. So that supply of coal is absolutely essential for the thermal power station, so they need to have some contract. Now, these kind of contracts essentially with respect to various parameters that they take place, pricing, how the prices will change over time, the quality of coal that will be supplied, and all that. So there are thousands of things that are part of the contract and that exist in this kind of relationship between different entities. Now, in all these transactions that happens between farms, there is an important aspect which is known as relationship specific investment. Okay, so in other words, if the coal needs to be transported from the coal mine to the electricity generating station, what you need is a dedicated corridor for transporting the coal, which is quite heavy. Okay, so if you have little bit of real life senses, you always know that the thermal power stations are often connected by rail tracks. Okay, and the coal, they come in the wagon, and Indian Railways sometimes facilitate those aspects, but typically you will find that the coal mines and electricity generating stations are typically connected by some kind of rail track, and there are multiple agencies who are cooperating to make coal available to the electric generating plant. Okay, and one easy example being most of you have, even if you are not from Delhi, you have seen that at the IP, the Indraprastha, that thermal power station, which is just on the bank of Jamuna on the ring road. If you know where all these Commonwealth Games setups are there, and you have this Rajghat side, that bypass, you will see that there was some, if you go by the inner road, you will find that very close to the ITO or nearby, before the IP, the metro station, there is a place where there are rail tracks moving inside that thermal power station. Now that particular station is kind of abandoned, but the issue was that there was this dedicated line which was visible, and if you have good memory, you will know that sometimes you will be in your early childhood days, at least 15-20 years back, I faced a couple of times when, due to this moving of wagons, the traffic will be stopped for half an hour or more. Okay, but then the question arises that in this kind of setup, who lays down the track? Okay, so is it the electricity generator who pays for this railway track, or is it the coal mine owner who pays for this railway track, or is it a contract between the coal mine, railway authority, and the thermal power generating station to have that track kind of in place, and then some kind of transaction that is involved in terms of payment to different parties. Okay, so what is important is that even if railways do do lay down the track, but they need some kind of assurance from the parties that they will be paid. If they are not paid properly, then their initial investment, which is absolutely relationship specific, because if the coal stops going to that thermal power, then this entire railway track will be completely useless. So this particular investment is completely relationship specific. Now, whether it is done by railway authority or by coal mine or by the electricity generator is a different matter, but whoever makes the investment needs some assurance that the transactions between parties happen in the specified manner. Okay, specified, I mean that as per some kind of contract, so that people are little bit sure about the future of this particular investment that takes place. Okay, now in such a context, what happens is that the typical problem that the parties face is the hold-up problem. Now, what is hold-up problem? Now imagine that there is no railway authority, that's out of the picture, and imagine that this thermal power station has plenty of choices, whether to locate it at IP or somewhere where there is another coal mine owned by some other agencies. Okay, so they have ex-ante some kind of options which are plenty, but as soon as they set up their plant at IP and they have some contract with the nearby coal mine and the railway track has been put in place, then the other party who has not made the investment can simply say that, go to hell, I am not going to give you the supply at the specified price. You have to increase my price. Okay. So as a result, this party can easily create a situation of hold up, and in anticipation of that, the party who is going to make the investment will not be making the required investment. Okay. So you can understand that whenever relationship specific investments are to be made, you have to have assurance through contracts, because these are not spot transactions. You have to have assurances through the contract that the full benefit of the investment is reaped over time and parties obey the contract that they have signed in. Okay, so this is an important aspect to understand, that farms do get involved with input sellers and variety of other entities to carry out their production activities. Okay, so the modern corporation should be looking at how to economize on these transaction costs, the transaction costs that can occur because of the non-cooperation of different parties in terms of not abiding by certain principles, and people are free to create a situation of hold up after some initial investments are made. Okay, so the corporation has to be designed in a manner that they minimize this transaction cost. Now, the easy way out from this particular problem of coal and electricity is that in case the electricity generator owns the coal mine, that solves many of the problem, because they will be under the same authority, and as a result, the non-cooperation between the two or the hold-up problem between the two will be reduced to a large extent. Okay, so these are aspects of transaction cost that needs to be minimized for any modern corporation, and the modern corporation will be designed in order to minimize the transaction cost that it faces with respect to different entities when it actually deals with those entities. Okay, and another important aspect is that internal organization of the farm, because as I've said that the farms do have contracts with labor and other factors of productions. Now, as soon as you have some production activities and there are different types of laborers which are also working in the same factory or...
Yeah, Sneha, can you tell me what's the question?
So the question that is relation-specific investment also a transaction cost, or are we referring to the hold-up problem as a transaction cost?
So relationship-specific investments are necessary for any good relationship to continue, right? Here you have seen that you need that railway track to be laid down between the two entities, that is coal mine and the electricity generating station. Okay, so that's an essential component of this transaction. Now the transaction costs are coming because of the behavior of the entities in terms of, as you will see, that had it been a complete contract, then there is no issue. But the problem arises that when people try to behave opportunistically, thereby creating a situation of hold up and then forcing some kind of renegotiation. Okay, so those issues are the transaction cost. Okay, so transaction costs are not necessarily that the price at which you are buying the product. In spot market, you don't have almost nothing as transaction cost except your cost of going to the market and then buying it. Okay, so that your personal cost of going to the market. Okay, but here the problem arises that there are relationships with investment that has to be made, and once that is made, the parties can behave opportunistically and then they can renegotiate on the terms of the contract. Okay, and that creates the transaction cost. Creates the friction in the smooth transaction between the two parties. Okay, and all these things will be termed as transaction cost. We will move deep into it gradually. Okay.
Yes.
They are cooperating to produce something. So you will certainly see some agency problem, because the laborers who are under contract, they are paid according to some formula, some principle, or as per some initial contract, but their objective may not be the same as the objective of the firm in terms of either revenue maximization or profit maximization or whatever that could be. Okay, so all these organizational aspects inside the firm is fraught with the problem of agency, and the agency problems, the essential manifestation of that agency problem is in terms of either you have moral hazard problem or you have adverse selection problems, and they are all embedded in any kind of relationship where laborers are organized. Okay. So now the main questions that we will be trying to understand is that we know that modern corporations should try to minimize the transaction cost that it faces, okay, in order to maximize its benefit. Similarly, within the organizations, there are different layers of agencies, and those agency problems used to be minimized. So as a result of that, you have the trade-off both with respect to the outside expansion. So that means how far you go in terms of internalizing the activities inside the firm. And then in the process, you also end up that the internal organization becomes large, and that might lead to many, many layers of agency problems, which might again become inefficient. So the main purpose of studying this is how to optimize or how to balance the size of the firm, and the essential question is why a firm is not a giant one. Okay, so in other words, what defines the boundary of the firm? That's the most important question that we will be looking into in this first couple of modules in the course. Okay, so in other words, why not all activities are undertaken inside a firm? So part of the answers will come from that there are problems of internal organizations, and beyond certain scale, it is very difficult to manage situation. On the other hand, you do not want everything to be procured from the market and then just do the packaging and send it off to the market, because that would mean that you are relying on each and every transaction with many parties who will be supplying the relevant components for your assembly line. And as a result, you might face many layers of transaction costs there, because people may not respect the contract that they have actually come into signing at the time of writing the contract. Okay. So what we need to understand the boundary of the firm is to understand that what are the backward and forward linkages of the firm. So in other words, how far you move forward in terms of integrating. Similarly, how far you move backward with respect to your different input divisions and backward linked transactions, how far you want to go. And that will define both in terms of how far you go forward and how far backward, that defines the periphery or the boundary of the firm. And this modern corporation, you will also see, because of this complexity of managing internal organizations, there are plenty of divisionalizations, and all those divisions, they are under some kind of interlinked transactions with the divisions of the same firm. So the corporation also has to design that how far they go on divisionalizing the activities within the firm. Okay. And the third thing is separation of ownership and control. This is an integral feature of the modern corporation, because most of the corporations that you know in terms of name and others, you will typically find that there are shareholders, and the shareholders are not necessarily the managers of the firm. So the management is given out to CEOs and other bodies who are actually managing the day-to-day activities of the firms. But on the other hand, the true owner of the firm is the people who have actually invested in terms of purchasing the shares. Now, many of those shareholders may be very small, and they may not have any incentive to monitor the manager or to exercise any kind of control in the firm or the organization. Okay, so this separation of ownership and control is an important aspect of modern corporations, where the ownership is divorced from the control. Okay, so the control is typically done by the CEOs and the managers. They are in most cases, they are not necessarily owning more than a small, very tiny fraction, because of their different incentive scheme over time, that they are incentivized in terms of holding shares of the firm. Otherwise, they don't hold the shares of the firms. Okay, but they actually call all the shots, take all the decisions about how to manage the firm. So there is a agency problem with respect to the shareholders and the managers who actually control the activities of the firm. Okay, so these are some of the important aspects to understand for your modern corporations. Now, if you look at the modern corporations, you will also realize.
Sir, could you please explain the agency problem again?
Agency problem, we will come into it. Agency problem, you know that within the organizations, there are different types of people who will be interacting to make some common good, right? So they have to all contribute and then produce. Okay. So the agency problem, there are coming from two sources. One is the moral hazard problem. So typically, someone is working under you doesn't necessarily mean that that guy is giving the best possible effort. So that's one problem that within the organization you will always face, because these are organizations with multiple layers of people and their interaction. Okay, so it is not that only single person defines a firm. Okay, and secondly, the adverse selection problem is that many of them may not have the proper ability. So in that case, there will be learning within the organizations. You have the policies of pay for performance. You will have the policies of firing the kind of workforce when they are not performing well. So all these things are creating problem of agency within the internal organization of the firm. Okay, so if you by any chance have ever seen any car servicing area, you don't need to go to a big factory. Go to a car servicing area, you will know that as soon as the car enters, there are different points of service that are acting. Now, if there are plenty of workforce they are working, and there is possibility of moral hazard. Okay, and then that's how the agency problem is within the organization. So there are different levels at which people are working, but it is going in a sequence. And if someone doesn't work well, so that person is creating a moral hazard in the whole process of the production. Okay. Clear? So the agency costs are coming from two sources: adverse selection and moral hazard. We'll look into it in more details in other content. Anything else at this stage? Okay.
Realize that their sizes are very varied. Okay, small to large, and it's very complex organization to understand. and also because of the diversity of their activities. So you know that Tata has Tata Consultancy Services, and also you know that Tata has salt production. Okay, and if you think of it, the Tata Group as a corporation or a firm under its umbrella has so many divisions, so many different kind of entities, and in many occasions they may not have any kind of interlink or synergy that might have between different organizations that they control overall as a Tata Group. Okay. So, and also the internal organizations, you know that we are repeatedly saying that internal organization is an important aspect of this modern corporation. So these three things needs to be understood to understand modern corporation, and these are some of the features. The other three are some of the features of the modern corporations. Okay. Now, if you look at the neoclassical theory, so this is the last line, which is very important. So the firm boundary depends on the transaction cost, and its purpose is to minimize the transaction cost and thereby design the firm in a manner that it doesn't go too far and wide, so that the transaction cost become too big to justify that everything, all the activities are under the same firm. Okay. Now, taking you from the neoclassical theory, which I have already said that it is a black box, because it doesn't tell you what happens inside the farm. You only know that it has a production function, and how the plant size is determined. It is determined by the minimum efficiency scale. And all of you know from your undergraduate days that it's basically the U-shaped curve, and through which you look at the minimum efficiency scale, and there you say that that's the long run equilibrium price will prevail, and that there you stop. Okay. So, and how the neoclassical theory of the firm is thought of, it can be thought of in two different stages. So firm minimize total cost subject to output reaching a particular amount. Okay. So there are vector of inputs, so call them X, and there is a production function, so Y equal to Fx, where Y is the output. Okay. And then your target is that you have a set of inputs, that's the input vector, and W is the input, W is the input vector, sorry, the price vector of inputs. So as a result, your purpose is to minimize this Wx such that the output is greater than some specified output level. Okay. And this guys gives rise to the total cost function Cy with associated marginal cost C-Y. Now in the second stage, what do you do? Given that you have already derived the cost function from the technological relationship that is there between the output and the input, and then in the second stage, what you look at, you want to maximize profit. And when you maximize profit, you have a price which is given from in the market, because your assumption is it's a perfectly competitive market. So no firm actually affects the input price. So they're all in price takers. And as a result, you maximize this. When you maximize this, you get P equal to C dash Y star, and you maximize at the Y your profit. Okay. And then this is easy to, this kind of solution will exist if you have that marginal cost which is increasing and all that. Okay. And then finally, what would be your zero profit condition? Not only that it is coming from your profit maximization condition, also you need to have that is equal to average cost. Okay. So, and Y star also minimizes the average cost. That's how it is done. Okay. So now there are problems with this analysis. This is purely a technical view of how the firm organizes production and decide on the level of output. This is severely criticized by different authors. So Hart is one of them. Three caveats with this technological view of the firm, and what are the objections? First is it ignores incentive problem inside the firm by treating the firm as a perfectly efficient black box. So in other words, that the manager or whoever, the profit maximizer, the owner of the firm, perfectly controls the level of input X. Now, if your input X is combination of different labor, then you know that there are thousands of issues between those interpersonal, there are thousands of issues between the laborers which needs to be sorted out, and you cannot have this one-to-one correspondence in terms of input to output. Okay. Now, the theory, neoclassical theory, has nothing to say about internal organization because it is taking a purely technical view that as if there is one-to-one correspondence between input and output, and everything is inside the black box, and you do not know what happens inside the factory, how they are organized, and how actually they get converted into output. Okay. And the third objection is that it does not pin down the farm boundaries. Why? Because as I told you that it only defines the minimum efficiency scale where the profit maximization is happening for a particular plant, not a farm. Why? Because you can simply add many plant and you can increase your scale of operation. Okay. So neoclassical theory by this particular condition only tells you about the size of the plant, not about the size of the farm or the boundary of the farm, which is a focus of the theory of farm, because we need to understand that what defines the boundary of the farm, how far it should go both backward and forward. This neoclassical theory doesn't tell you anything about that. Okay, so the source of these economies of scale within the farm is unclear by this neoclassical theory. Why this marginal cost is increasing, it's not clear. Okay, it is not told. If this is explained by limited span of control by managers, so if you think that if the scale of operation is large, given the small number of managers, they may not be able to do them, then why not have a second plant and hire a second manager? Okay, and then you keep on increasing it. So as this particular farm doesn't have any boundary. Okay, it can keep.
Yes, there is some question.
So, what is the distinction between a plant and a farm here? The third.
Sorry?
So the
Your voice is not clear.
hello, sir.
Your voice is not clear.
Sir, am I audible now?
Yeah, you are audible, but say it very clearly.
So, what is the distinction between a plant and a farm? This third disadvantage.
So that is exactly the objection raised by Hart, that what you have in your undergraduate producer theory is a theory of plant, not a farm. Because I can always have that USEP few hundred plants, and as a result, my overall production capacity can be 100 into those minimum efficiency of scale, right? So your entire perfect competition theory that you have talked about based on the producer theory, where it is actually producing as a price taker at the minimum cost, okay? So that is a plant theory, not a farm theory. Farm means it can own many plants also, right? What stops a farm to set up another plant? Because again, it will have a U-shaped curve. Again, at that price, it can produce that much amount and get profit, normal profit. Okay. So what you have learned so far as the neoclassical theory of farm, that is essentially a neoclassical, that's essentially a theory of plant, not farm. So how much a plant should produce? It should produce at the minimum efficient scale. That means at the bottom of the U-shape average cost curve. Clear?
Yes.
But what prevents you to duplicate it? You can continue duplicating as many as you like, you being the owner of the farm. Okay. So that's why the objection that is being raised, that the neoclassical theory is not telling anything about the boundary of the farm. So how many plants would be for a farm to have and all that, that's nothing of that sort is answered. And what is our target? Our target is to see that what defines the boundary of the farm. So where it will stop. Okay, why don't we see a giant farm which is undertaking all production activities of the world under the same organization? Okay, so why we don't see that? There are reasons, and we are in search of theories which will give us that reason. Okay.
Yes.
They're trying to find the rationale for that. Okay.
Using its multiple plans. Any question? Any question? Prime mover in this understanding of the farm. So in Coase's viewpoint in 1937, neoclassical theory is perfectly consistent with the existence of just one big farm carrying all production in the world. Okay, that's a very strong statement, which tells you that it doesn't tell you why so many farms exist and why so many activities are performed inside and so many activities are performed outside the farm. Okay, so you need to look into the transaction cost, what defines the boundary of the farm, and the nature of the transaction cost needs to be understood. Now, the transaction cost approach is an important approach towards understanding that most of the economic transactions are fraught with some kind of transaction cost. Now, forget about farm. If you just think of any transaction for your own use, suppose you buy something which is not as such for production purpose, but for your own consumption purpose. Even there, whatever you buy, whether it is a car or anything, you know that there are lots of uncertainties between the two parties. So for example, if it is a durable goods, you are worried about whether the farm will exist tomorrow, because you see that under lots of this economic crisis, many of the farms are going out of business, in a sense that some companies are going out of business. So you do not want to be stuck with a durable good where you know tomorrow there will be no service. Okay, so as a result, the transaction cost is important even for your own selection of the consumption good. You want that how easily all these transactions with the parties can be maintained over time. So you need to be careful about all these aspects. Okay, so Coase's starting point is that there are substantial transaction costs. The size of this transaction cost may vary in market transaction and intra-farm one. So essentially in economics, we always try to look for trade-offs, and that trade-offs defines the existence of different things. Okay, so that also includes the existence of farm, how far it should go. So if you go for market transactions, there are costs. If you go for intra-farm ones, which means that you bring everything under the farm, not everything, whatever little you are bringing in, there are costs associated with managing those related activities inside the farm. So in terms of Coase's view, that you should define the boundary of the farm by looking at the cost of market transaction vis-a-vis the cost of organizing that particular activities inside the farm. Okay, so then if one cost is higher, then you just stop your activities at that point. Okay, so that you maximize your profit. So the main reason why it is profitable to establish farm would seem to be that there is a cost of using the price mechanism, and these are the important transaction costs that Coase has mentioned. And what are those transaction costs? Now, first and foremost, all of us know that it's not easy to know the prices of everything, because not that everything is prices are posted on the internet. So if you go to Kamlanagar or anywhere, if you want to buy a cloth, you do not know whether the shopkeeper is overcharging you or not. So for everything, cost of discovering what the relevant prices are. Okay, so you have to find out the prices. So just if you think that you want to buy certain things from the market as input, then you have to find out the relevant prices. Now, when you are finding the relevant prices, cost of negotiating and concluding a separate contract for each exchange and transaction. So if you understand that farm means that you need thousands of activities to be organized inside the farm, and some of them you are trying to buy from outside, and when you are trying to buy something from outside, you essentially have a situation that with respect to each supplier of those outside sellers, you need to come into some kind of contract, okay? And you have to negotiate some contract with them. Now, you might think that, do we need really contract? Of course you need, because for most of the production activities, you need tailor-made or customized input. Now, when you need customized input, you immediately know that you have to come into contract with those agencies. Otherwise, why will they customize your input? Because what they customize as your company's name in the input, tomorrow they cannot sell it outside. Okay, so you need to come into contract with all the parties of the transactions. And now another problem with the contract is the cost of specifying all possible contingencies in a long-term contract. Now, long-term contracts are very problematic because many things change in the real world. Okay, so there are thousands of uncertainties that affect the state of the world, and you do not know which state will occur tomorrow. So as a result, if you want to write a contract, you should ideally write a contract with respect to all state contingencies. Now that's almost impossible. Okay, so there is a cost of specifying all possible contingencies because of many other reasons. Some of them we'll be discussing as we move along. So there are problems with long-term contract when you are coming in contract with those input sellers. Okay, and of course, this is another aspect which was traditionally very well known both in finance, like Modigliani-Miller theorem and all, so that there are taxes of market transactions. Okay, so this is typically true. So what something is organized internally, you do not need to pay taxes because the transactions is within the organization. Okay, but if you want to buy something, you typically face some kind of taxes, and under the current structure of India, you face GST to be paid for every transaction that you do. So this is additional tax. But if you do different layers of activities inside your farms, then they are in the production chain, and for that there is no market pricing required and no taxes to be paid. Okay, so these are in Coase's view that matter to create transaction cost for market transactions. Okay, now what are the cost of contracts? Now this is not necessarily the Coase's own kind of contribution. This is the way we are trying to go into the incomplete contract domain, and these are the reasons why contracts are not complete. And if you try to write complete contract, there are problems. So these are some of the most important problems with writing complete contract with anybody. Now, thinking about different eventualities and planning to deal with them, which may not be foreseeable. Imagine that you have asked for some customized input and the seller undersupply the quality of input or does not do the customization properly, which means your quality of the product that you are producing will suffer. Now you can imagine that this undersupply of quality can be in continuum space. Okay, it can be 10% below quality, 20% below quality, and all that. So it's a continuum space. And no contract is possible that if it is below 1%, I will pay you this much. If it is below 20%, I will pay you this much. So these are really problematic in terms of writing down a full contingent contract, because so many eventualities are possible, and to plan out to deal with all such eventualities is impossible. So, and as I told you that there are too many contingencies, so that's the major reasons you cannot think this is a continuum space. Now, cost of negotiating with others about these plans and monitoring costs. So the problem is that suppose you are smart enough and you are able to think through all the products and their qualities, or for that matter, different sizes or whatever. Okay. Now, then it is not easy to come into contract with another party whose understanding and thinking might be very different. Now, in many situations, when you come into some kind of transactions, you will certainly see that the people who can actually falter on those deliveries, they will typically say that you don't need to write all these contracts, and I will give you the best side. There is nothing, no issue. Okay. So, but as soon as the time of delivery comes, you will often be dissatisfied with the delivery, and you cannot really do anything. Now, both sides of a contract may sometimes be able to understand that whether there is a quality which is undersupplied or whatever. But the problem with all these contracts are that these contracts may not be enforceable by a third party, that is court. Okay, so suppose tomorrow I say that the quality of the input that is delivered to me is not of proper quality. Now, even if the person who supplied understands it, I understand it, but given that there's a dispute that has arisen between the two, and obviously the other party's interest is to claim that he has supplied the best quality. So the problem is that these cannot be easily enforceable by a court of law because there is a limitation on the part of judiciary in terms of understanding the bilateral contract that has taken place. Okay, so the technological knowledge when it comes to the technological aspect of the supply or the breach of contract that has taken place between the two sides in any contract, it is impossible for the third party or court to actually enforce those contracts because it is not possible for them to verify. Okay, verify. So for example, suppose someday you pick up a fight on the road and then you go to the next day and suppose there is no CCTV camera and all, and you go to the court, then both sides are presenting their story. Now for the court, it is impossible to actually verify the claims made by different parties. Okay, so although both parties actually know the truth, but given that they have different interest in terms of misrepresenting the truth, so the court cannot be of much help. So because of all these reasons, the contracts which cannot be enforced will typically not be written because there is no point writing those contracts which cannot be enforceable in the court of law. Okay, so that these are really the important cost of contracts which come to save the level of transaction cost that the firm faces when they deal with outside parties. Okay, and that defines that whether sometimes they should go for outside transactions or they should go for making on their own. So the outside stories are easy to understand because of the understanding of some amount of the cause's own idea in terms of this contract. Okay, but the problem is that is understandable that there are problems with the outside transaction. But then should we all be incorporating all the activities inside the firm? Regarding that, cause's point of view is little vague and it's not clear. What are his point? He suggests that increase in the firm size will lead to decreasing returns to the entrepreneurial function, increasing cost of allocating factors of production to their best use, increasing supply price of some factors. Okay, so if you keep on increasing, these are the costs which will go up. So there will be complexities in terms of entrepreneur to manage all the activities inside. And then also when the production activities or the farm size become too large, it is very difficult to know each and every factors of production to put them into their best usage because you have to put all these inputs into best possible usage to get the best possible returns to be generated. Okay, so so the relative size of this transaction cost. So one that is given by writing cost with outside parties, and then thinking of when you are actually doing the inside activities. So these two relative costs will ultimately determine the size of the firm. So that is cause's view on the what defines the boundary of the firm. Now Williamson's some of the articles were post 1970s, and then this is 1985 being cited in some the other article. So the cause's view of the firm did not receive much of the significance in the mainstream economics. Okay, it was criticized for its vagueness and was dubbed tautological. So between 1940 and 1970s, the major development that has happened in the theory of the firm was the neoclassical theory, and that's what you have actually learned in your microeconomics course. So that's the technological view of the firm. Now again, Williamson from 1970s onwards brought transaction cost consideration back into the spotlight by making this approach much more operational by providing some of the explanations behind this transaction cost, okay? What constitute those transaction costs, why they are so important, and how they are happening like that, okay? Now, his theory is based on three important concepts. One is bounded rationality, second is opportunism, and third is asset specificity. Now, remember that Coase talked about these aspects, but in a vague manner. First and foremost, Coase didn't talk about opportunism at all. Indirectly, it has mentioned about those opportunism in terms of that if there is some kind of contract not properly abided by, then in case of breach of contract, what will happen and things like that, but didn't talk much about specifying them in a proper manner. So what Williamson did, so this bounded rationality, some of you might be aware just like that people are not necessarily rational, but they always try to be rational, okay? So in other words, this Herbert Simon's bounded rationality concept was borrowed by Williamson, and he says that in economic actors are intendedly rational, but only limitedly so. The assumption of bounded rationality provides a foundation for the incompleteness of the contract, okay? So far we have been talking about incompleteness more in terms of the difficulty and the complexity, but here it is also being talked that this is partly also the limitation of the rationality, that it is impossible, although even you feel that the economic actors are rational, but given that they are not fully rational, it is not possible for them to actually write complete contract. Okay, so in a complex and unpredictable world, okay, so this is both in terms of the complexity, in terms of the different contingencies that can arise, and also the degree of uncertainty that is there in the world. Boundedly rational agents will be unable to plan ahead for all the contingencies that may arise, okay? So as a result, that's a difficulty in terms of writing a foolproof contract. Even when contingencies are foreseen, it may be hard for contracting parties to negotiate about these plans because of limited capability of describing this possible state. So again, because of the limited rationality, they will not be able to convince the other parties in terms of all these dimensions, because both sides are limitedly rational. So it is not possible for them to come to terms on a common ground in terms of writing a contract. Now, finally, even when parties can plan and negotiate these contingencies, it may be hard for a third party to verify them and enforce the contract, because as I told you that many of these breach of contract related aspects may not be possible in terms of convincing the other party that, look, this is what the level of or the degree of breach that has taken place, okay? So a particular component or the parts, if you take it to the court is a lawyer, and you know who are the friends who become lawyer. They are not technically very sound in terms of understanding science and other things. Okay, I'm making a very strong statement, so please don't take it seriously, okay? So essentially it is impossible by any court of law to actually codify, because law is basically done in terms of codification. So to codify whether a particular chemical or a particular components of an automobile or something related to a mobile parts is not properly supplied. It is impossible for the court to actually verify those things. So it is impossible for them to actually enforce a contract, which even if they are written in stronger terms, in terms of, say, for example, a chemical needs to be delivered, and chemical that you can actually write down the full formula, their temperature, their pressure, how they should be packaged, everything you can write. But then when the supply has taken place and the people have moved to court, then it is impossible for the court to actually see where actually the breach of contract has taken place or where the parties has not obliged the contract. Okay, so because of that reasons, so you will not have a complete contract. So incomplete, so ex-ante contracts will tend to be incomplete, and they will be renewed or renegotiated as the future unfolds. Okay, so because you are not writing the foolproof contract in terms of all possible contingencies and all possible things, so there will be some contingency where all the things that you have written will not be of any value. So as a result, you have to renegotiate the contract. Okay. Now, complete contracts are never renegotiated. So basically that means ex ante everything is specified and no other contingency arises which is not specified in the complete contract. So by definition, complete contract is an impossibility in a real world. Okay. So incomplete contract is the order of the day, and as we have incomplete contract, then we will know that they needs to be renegotiated as and when they appear. Okay. Now, the problem here is that we have bounded rationality on which we have been elaborating things. So this is about the people's ability to some extent to actually do things. But the second point Williamson emphasized is opportunism. Now look, as soon as you have incomplete contract, then that means certain contingencies and certain things are not specified in the contract. Now when they are not specified in the contract, now self-interest seeking economic agents will try to look for opportunity of behaving differently. Okay. So that in order to maximize their own profit or own benefit in a limited way. So the fact that agents are opportunistic is a necessary condition for the incompleteness of contract to lead to inefficiencies. So what is happening? This is important to understand. Now, suppose you have complete contract, then everything is gone. You don't need to bother. Suppose you have incomplete contract because of all the problems that you have described here. Now, even with incomplete contract, it doesn't matter, because if the people are rational enough and they believe there is benefit of continuing with the contract and renegotiating that in the best possible way, then it doesn't matter for the parties to come into some kind of transactions. Okay. Then the incompleteness of the contract does not create any additional problem. But the problem arises because of the opportunism. As soon as you see there is a deviation from the contracted code of conduct, then you essentially try to take advantage of that situation and try to maximize your own benefit. And because of this opportunistic behavior under certain contingencies, the incompleteness of the contract will lead to inefficiencies. Otherwise, it could have been very efficiently resolved if the parties are willing and they are willing to resolve the problem in the Pareto efficient way. Okay, but that they will not do. They will try to create inefficiency because they want to maximize their own benefit, which will come on the way of going through with the transaction. Okay, so this opportunism is another dimension which complicate the non-existence of complete contract. Finally, Williamson points out that certain assets or investments are relationship specific. This is the most important part of the problem, which leads to the situation that, as I told you, the example of coal mine and the electricity generator, it's not easy to switch partner. Now, given that already the investments are already made in the relationship, if you switch, so for example, the railway tracks are laid down. Now, if you switch, some of these investments will go waste. Okay, you might be able to recover some part of it given the nature of the investment. Okay, so for example, the iron can be taken out, but the land cannot be shifted. Okay, where the entire thing has been laid down and maybe that has been under deal with some landowner. Okay, so they cannot be easily shifted. So the idea is that because of the relationship specific investment, the value of that investment is always higher within the transactions than outside it. So in case the transaction does not go through, then there will be a lot of loss due to this relationship specific investment. Now, anticipating that, the parties will not make investment. So the relationship specific investment will not be done to the optimal level because people will be afraid that people will be behaving opportunistically, taking advantage of the incomplete contract. So it is better for me not to invest too much in the relationship. Okay, so that's bad. That's bad for the transaction to take place, because any good investment in the relationship specific investment will actually reduce the cost of production in a big way. So that particular investment will not be made. So because of this specificity in the relationship, because you cannot easily switch partner or take out the investment to facilitate other transactions with other parties. Clear? So may I ask you any questions if you have? In Delhi school, I have specialized myself over time in certain courses. Now, I cannot easily take it to another organization where they already have teachers for this kind of courses. So I have to adapt to another set of courses. Okay. Now, have I known that my job is very uncertain and I lose my job in a short while, I will not have made the necessary investment to make this course as fruitful as it is today. Okay. And that's why this is a serious criticism of all the appointments that happens in the ad hoc category in the colleges as well as in the university, because if you are appointing them on a temporary basis, they will have very little incentive to actually invest heavily in those courses, to go into the depth of them and make it easily accessible to the students, or make the students or the students benefit from those investment of the teachers that they make. Okay, so these are, if you look around, you will find that these kind of examples, plenty of this kind of examples, that most transaction has some kind of relationship specificity which cannot be easily transferred to other places. Okay. Now, in this context, as in course, the firm will replace the price system with transaction costs are minimized by transacting inside the firm. So basically, the Williamson story is also then that because of all these incompleteness of contract and the relationship with investment related issues, as I told you that the coal mine should have been ideally owned by the thermal power station or the other way around, doesn't matter. But if they are in the same, under the same ownership, then that relationship with investment would always be useful. Okay, so then there will not be under investment in those investments. So that's very important. So the transaction cost should be minimized, and in that case, the boundary of the firm should be accordingly designed. Now, the larger the specificity of the asset involved in the transaction, it increases the transaction cost when you are doing the transaction with outside parties. The larger the uncertainty surrounding the transaction, it increases the cost, okay? Because this uncertainty could be for a variety of reasons. It can also be involved with some kind of natural disaster or something in the present context, that when most of the farms are actually integrated through global value chain. So it is not that they not only produce in-house, they also do not purchase from the farms from their own country. They try to source them from other countries. Now, when you have a situation like Corona or other kind of international embargo on the movement of people as well as freight, then you have the problem that this leads to huge amount of uncertainty with respect to the supplies of input that you get into, that you need for your farm. So that increases the transaction cost. And the frequency of transaction is also important in terms of the defining the transaction cost. If you need something as your input more frequently, then possibly it is better to produce that in-house rather than relying on the outside parties, because it will increase the transaction cost with the other parties. Now, to give you another interesting examples, few years back there was this tsunami, and at that time the city has ordered to different companies for laptops, and some of them were Sony laptops. And because of the Japanese tsunami, the Sony just simply said that we cannot supply the laptop, despite they have won the bidding, the auction and online auction at that time. So they gave quotation, and then we selected Sony particular seller, and then the seller said that sir, nothing is coming from Japan, so we will not be able to deliver those products. Okay, so for CTE, laptop is an integral part and very important, but if you look at it, we do not produce because we do not need to. We need laptop once in 5 years, okay, to replace it. But when you need a sweeper to sweep the classrooms or something, we better appoint those sweepers, because you cannot rely on an outside party who will be providing those services on a daily basis. So these are just simple examples from your own backyard or from your own households that you can extend, that when the specificity of the asset is higher, when the uncertainty of transaction is higher, when the frequency of transactions are higher, then actually it is better to organize those activities inside the firm, because the transaction cost dealing with outside parties will be higher. Okay, so Williamson is much better and much clearer in terms of description of the transaction cost associated with market transaction between non-integrated firms. So Coase also talked about certain things, but Williamson is a much further development. But intra-firm related issues is somewhat vague, because Williamson has not given much importance to the intra-firm, the different factors, how they are organized, whether the agency problems are of paramount importance or not within those organizations. He has not paid much attention to those aspects. So as a result, what limits the size of the firm? Now, in terms of Williamson's view, that the lock-in effects are less important in inter-firm transactions, and he instead appeals to incentive and bureaucratic cost to limit the size of the firm. So to tell you, so when the transaction costs are too much, you organize them inside the firm. Okay, so that's clear. Now, then if we want to expand our firm by internalizing all those transactions by producing inside, then what actually defines the size of the firm? That means that what restricts the firm from expanding up to infinity. His point is that incentive and bureaucratic cost will limit the size of the firm. So he has tangentially referred to the agency problem inside the cost and the problem of governance, okay, but not clearly given those things, okay. Very good descriptions of those things. So as long as these governance costs are unrelated to specificity, his claim that market transactions dominate integration at low levels of asset specificity is a valid one. Okay, so you will be transacting in the market for those transactions where you have low level of asset specificity. Okay, not too much. So these are Williamson's view, and they basically laid the foundation for, with the help of this transaction cost, some kind of modern theory of firm. Now, these modern theory of firms are approached from various dimensions. So these are some of the things you must be reading them. So there is not much I need to elaborate, but I will highlight one important thing. So although you are learning something from Coase and Williamson, but what is most important thing that is missing is the agency theories. And these agency theories, the development took place in 1970s. And what are the agency theories? Model hazard and adverse selection. Okay, so these are the two important developments that took place in the 70s and 80s that you have learned from your game theory course, and they now are going to determine partly the nature of the firm and the boundary of the firm, how they should be organized and designed. Okay, so
do you have any question at this point?
So can you explain the last line, that as long as governance costs are unrelated to specificity, is claimed as market transactions?
As long as governance costs are unrelated to
Specificity, his claim that market transaction dominate integration is a valid. This it was on the next page.
Okay, as long as governance costs are unrelated to specificity, Williamson's claim that market transactions dominate integration at low levels of asset specificity is a valid one. So you can understand that what was Williamson's point. Williamson has made much more elaboration on the cost of market transactions by introducing the three important aspects, that is the specificity of the assets involved in any transaction, uncertainty surrounding the transaction, and the frequency, how frequently you need to be involved with the transactions. Okay, so depending on these three aspects, now if all these dimensions are higher, okay, then it is better to organize that particular activity inside the firm. Okay, so asset specificity being higher, that means you know that there will be problem of investment, because outside the relationship it has little value, who will make the investment and all these things. Similarly, if the market transactions involve a lot of uncertainty, then why should you be unnecessarily getting into an uncertain world? You can actually organize the production inside, so that will reduce the degree of uncertainty. Similarly, if you need it very frequent, then why do you unnecessarily rely on market transactions? So under these three situations, Williamson has a clear view that you should organize those production internally. Okay, so that was the major kind of contribution. But when it comes to the situation that, okay, you can actually organize many of these things because of those reasons internally, but then what prevents the firm to become very large? Then Williamson's answer was that there is incentive and bureaucratic cost which will limit the size of the firm. Now, he was tangentially mentioning about the incentive problem inside the firm when the firm is becoming bigger by internalizing some of the transactions that it could have done with the market, but then that will increase the bureaucratic cost, or that will create more incentive problems. So Williamson gave some hint about the internal cost of the organizing the firm in all these activities internally. Okay, now the issue is, as long as this governance cost, this incentive and bureaucratic cost that Williamson is referring is known as governance cost. Okay, so governance within the firm boundary are, if they are not related to asset specificity, then market transaction dominate integration. So if these governance costs are higher and not related much to the asset specificity, then this market transaction will be a preferred option. Okay, and this is possible when the asset specificity of those transactions are low. Otherwise, again, if there is asset specificity which is high, you would not be able to have the transaction with the market. Okay, so the idea is we are gradually trying to converge to a theory of organization where some of the activities are undertaken internally. Okay, and we are trying to develop a boundary, that means what are the things to be done outside the organization, what are the things to be done inside the organization, and that is in a more kind of technical, the technical language of the firm is the decision about make versus buy. Okay, so what are the things to make inside the firm and what are the things to buy from outside the firm, that is market. Okay, so that's it. So if you read some of the literature, you will get a good grasp, but I can only tell you that these are the historical perspective through which the theory is evolving, and there is no very clear-cut answer of all the perception of this old literature, because remember one thing, that this is the theory in the making. Okay, so Williamson, and that's why we said that Coase was very vague, then Williamson clarified some of the issues, but again Williamson is vague with respect to its internal organization. Then we will move into the incentive theory and see that how far incentive theory will give us a theory of organization or firm, where we will be able to clearly specify the make or buy decision with respect to a particular activity or a transaction. Okay.
Sir, Could
Yes.
you please explain what you mean by asset specificity?
If you remember that example we gave about the coal mine and the electricity generator, the rail track
Yes, sir.
specific. Rail track is the specific asset. Without that asset
Okay, sir.
place, it is not possible to carry out the transaction properly. And what is the specificity part of it? It outside the relationship, it has very little value because this is laid down on the ground, okay? And if you try to recover that investment, you will get very little value because that's already sunk. Only the material, maybe the iron can be this kind of sold, or maybe the land can be again sold, but again, obviously at a lower price than the amount of cost that you have incurred to build that. Okay, and that is true for all transactions. All possible transactions involve some kind of specificity in investment to make the transaction through. Anything else?
So where can we find the readings for this lecture? Will you be sharing the lecture slides and the lecture
See,
recording?
there will not be much slides. Actually, I will move into the directly to some of the papers. Okay, and obviously there will be some highlighted portion that will be the clear focus. But as such, there is no ready-made slides which are sufficient. Okay, that's number one. Number two is that this course is in the making, so we'll be using some of the outside material that is being done by Barron and Daniel Barron and Michael Powell for their course. Okay, so again we'll be directly focusing on some of their that lecture notes. Okay, directly on the screen and try to understand some of these. Okay. Now, in this initial descriptive stuff, I will be sharing with you some survey papers also. So there you will get the senses of what is being discussed and talked about. Okay. It's very easy to tell you what's the theory of farm in the current context. Okay. But when I'm telling you the historical context, the perspective and its evolution, these are typically somewhat boring. Because as you can see, Coase wrote something in 1930s, and then there was a 30 years gap in between when it was the heyday of general equilibrium, the perfect competition, and that was ruling the roost in the economics literature. And then only in 1970s, the agency theory came and Williamson's transaction cost again came into focus. So that's how the history of the development of this organizational theory is. Okay, because before that in the neoclassical theory, there was no importance given to all these transactions and complexities within the organization. It's only when we have the incentive theory in place, agency theory in place, the focus got shifted